Okay, so let's get started with the lighting portion. This is something I find really enjoyable in Cinema 4D and Redshift. Makes it really easy and there's lots of room for creative input. So I just want to go through all the different tools that I use for lighting and as well as some of the assets that I use and then where I find a lot of those things and where you can download some of them for free as well. So let's just get started. And I've got everything docked for the lighting portion, almost everything right here under lights, but you can also go up to Redshift, lights, and there's a bunch of different options up here for you. So we're going to be going over a few of these, not all of them. I find that I only use a couple of them most of the time. The other ones are for pretty specific purposes in my opinion, so let's get started with one of the most used, which is the dome light. So what a dome light does is this. Gives you a simple interface, well, relatively simple, and it asks for a path, and that's for the dome map. So these can be a lot of different things. It'll be an HDRI file type, and where I find these is on the internet most of the time. So this Polyhaven site is a great place. They've got tons of HDRIs, and all of this is totally free. So you can just jump on here, download any of these. And these are really nice quality. I've used these a lot. So lots of different things from indoor, outdoor environments, different times of day, different lighting conditions, and see from what this site is showing you that it's basically an environment. It's an environment light that gives you the reflections to simulate a natural environment without having to build the entire environment for your reflective surfaces. So let's just go in here and we're going to go and grab a HDRI that I've downloaded. This is just a Studio Small. So if you want to use the same one, it's off the Polyhaven site. So let's just hit no. And then when we render, here we go. We can see a totally different look. And already this is looking more realistic, right? We've got some actual bounce lights coming off of the back, and we have some interesting reflections on our very shiny garments right now. Okay. And that's all this is. It's a really simple interface. Lets you control some things like exposure down here. So if you wanted to decrease the intensity, you can do that. So I have saturation here. It's not going to be super apparent, but if this was colorized, you would be able to see a difference by dragging the slider down and removing some of the color from those reflections and from the light. And then likewise, we also have a tint down here. So it's white now. If I add this tint on, totally changes the look of our scene. Really interesting stuff. Okay, so let me just bring this back down to white for now. And then there's also this enable background here that's not coming up in our scene right now, but if I turn up or turn off the environment, you'll be able to see. So let's go back into our dome light. And currently we have the enable background set to on. So if we go over here to the coordinates, this is how you rotate your HDRI. So you can see as I rotate this, you can see that there's a background. And if I jump into our other camera and zoom out, you see we're in this photo studio scene. And that's what's providing our reflections. So when you rotate around using the coordinates in our dome light, you can get different looks based on the of the HDRI map. So now we can see that we've got lights off here on the right side, and that's making this nice shadow over here. Maybe that's something we want to work with. But it's really up to you, whatever look that you're going for. What's nice about HDRIs being able to flip them like this is you get a lot of flexibility out of a single texture, single light. Okay. These coordinates can go negative too, so something like this gives you a light over here in front of the character. But I think something like this is fine for now. And we can always play with these intensities a little bit. So we're going to add other lights into our scene as well. So this is a great way to get started. Some scenes may not even need any other lights. You might be able to get away with just an HDRR, and that's fine. And something else that you can do to light the entire scene all at once to get a realistic environment is to go up here to Redshift and grab an object and Redshift Sun and Sky Rig. And this is something preset put together that simulates a daylight system. So you have 2 tabs here, well, 5, but 2 that are important. So there's a Sky tab and a Sun tab. And similarly to the dome light, you can go over to the coordinates and you can rotate around object. And as you can see, as I rotate this around, it totally changes our scene. We can see different sun effects happening, and if you change this rotation down here, you can start to adjust almost the time of day. So at night, have a sunset look, and going up more and more, you can get kind of a midday light. Some really intense shadows. And you can see actually what's going on is our background, as we created that displacement, you can see it's actually creating shadows for us now. So if we go into our environment and we reduce our maximum displacement, you'll see that it will reduce these shadows here as we won't have as much height. So just bring this down. Yeah, so you can see we've reduced this quite a lot, and now there's almost no shadow appearing here, even though we've got quite a strong top light. So this wasn't something that I actually used for the course, but it's a great way to get a really interesting lighting setup for daylight, or even indoors through windows and things like that. So have a play with that. But I'm just going to dome light for now, and then we can go on and look at a couple of other different basic area lights. All right, so let's just grab an area light, drop that into our scene, and let the render update. Okay, and then right away you can see what we've done is we've put in a very large light, which is this size here. So now if we want to keep this render view looking with our other camera, we can actually go over here and change the camera that we're focused on. So the camera that we're using to navigate around the scene is set to camera 1, but the camera that is looking at our character is actually this first one here. So if we set the redshift view to be there, we can use the viewport view to move around while still looking at our scene. So we've got this massive here, and as we move it around our scene and rotate it around, you can see how it affects the scene. So it's a really strong top light now. You can rotate it down and create all sorts of different effects, and you can shrink the lights right here. And this is just a great way to really fine-tune the look of your scene. So if I just turn off our dome light here, no other lights in the scene. I'm just going to kill that sunlight. And so you can make your own studio setup just by using these area lights. So if I just put a couple of these in the scene, maybe drop their intensity down a little bit, and that's done by clicking on the area light, going to the General tab, and then dropping down the exposure or the intensity multiplier. So if I pull this exposure down, it's going to reduce the intensity in our scene. And then you can just start to layer these. So if I just hold Control and drag, you can copy a light, or any object for that matter. And then you can just start to position these in different ways around your scene, creating this really basic 3-point light setup. So let me just turn off our render view real quick so we can move around in the viewport easier. And oftentimes you'll get these blown out lights like this. So I tend to work in quick shading lines or hidden line, and that just lets me see everything in just this black and white mode just so you're not seeing the intensity of the lights. I'm typically using the Redshift render view for look dev on the lighting, so I don't necessarily need them to show up here. So with this basic setup, all I want to do is create a basic 3-point lighting setup, which basically means we've got 3 lights, one in the back here, looking a bit angled a bit down behind our character. We'll have another light over here on the side, facing inward like that, and then I'll often have another one up front here. Maybe up here, pointed towards our character. Okay, let's just go back to our view and let's just turn on our render view so we can see what we've done. Okay, so we've got these sharp lines, and that's just where the level of the light is. So to get rid of this, I'll just need to move this light up further so that we don't have those sharp lines. And then we get this really nice fall off from where it's close up here to where there's not as much light hitting our surface. And these still may be a bit hot, and by hot I mean intense, bright, turning our whites a little bit too bright. So we can just go in and pull our lights down a bit so they're not so intense. And this lets us finally control the intensity of each light. Whereas with the dome light, it's sort of all or nothing. You can control the position of it, but there's no way to increase the intensity specifically of the light over here. And what's great about dome lights and area lights is you can use them in conjunction. So say I like the way that these reflections are looking in this basic kind of darker, moody scene, but I want a bit more intensity over here. So if I click on an area light, and you can tell which one it is, this blue arrow that appears in the viewport, the position of the area light if it's off the screen. So just click that, turn that on, and see we can customize the look of our scene while keeping the dome light's basic reflections on and just adding on adding on area lights, excuse me. And this is typically how I'll work. I'll get a basic reflection and environment light going with the dome light, and then based on what I want the scene to look like, I'll go in and add area lights specifically in the correct position. So if I just add this one back in, you can see that's our top light. And then this is the light over here on the left. That's more of a key light, typically brighter and is lighting up the most important parts of our scene, but I actually like having this a bit dimmer. Okay. So you can see if I zoom out here, review, these are our 3 lights, and this is our camera position. Okay. So you can play around with this and get a lighting setup that looks good to you. Often I'll group these all into a group, and then you can hide these and you can copy and paste a new light group, and that just lets you audition a couple of different environments just to make sure that you're happy with what you've got. You can compare it to another lighting setup. So for this one, maybe I'll just try rotating this. Maybe let's use the top light, but bring it over here this time. Let's move this light maybe. And this is why I enjoy art directing and doing lighting look dev in Cinema 4D so much. It's so quick and easy just to get a quick setup going and really just try out a bunch of different things. And that's really the core of a lot of my development is experimentation. You never know how something is going to look until you give it a try. And then what if I just move this light over here? And one other thing to note is the intensity of your light and the size of the light actually controls the intensity of the shadows. So let me just show that here. So if I turn off all the lights in this except for this one, you can see if I increase the size of this, that actually increases the brightness of the light because there's more surface area for the light to be emitted from. But because of the size, these shadows are quite small. If I shrink this light a lot and then increase the intensity, you can see very, very shadows. So this is a way to emulate a sort of flash photography look that can often be seen in a lot of editorial photography, fashion photography, and even just kind of daylight, just day photography, day-to-day photography. Okay. So combined a lot of these things together for the course. I think it was something similar to this with a main flashlight coming from the camera, essentially. A basic dome light, and then a couple other area lights to fill out the rest of the scene. This looks quite flat just with this one light, but we can add in a couple other ones to just give it a bit more depth and variety. Okay, so just scaling this up so we've got a bit of shadows. Actually going to scale this down a little bit. Okay, so something like this is pretty similar to what I was using for the course. Got this really strong flashlight, and then you've got a couple other ambient lights off to the side here, just filling out the scene. But again, whatever looks good to you and whatever you're going for. This is not gospel or anything. Okay, so we've got a basic light setup now. And then another thing I want to show you is the area lights here. There is a texture here, actually. Now, if I go into my, let's just flashlight here, just to make it super clear, or at least as clear as it can be. So down here in the path, just like the dome light, it's asking for a texture. So if you click this light, or these dots here, we can go over and grab what is called an HDR. And let's just grab this umbrella _A. And this texture is going to change how our scene looks. So you can see it's actually sharpened up these edges even more, and it has actually used the light in a way as well. So this is a quick way to get really realistic lighting setups. This is something that would be used in a studio. And this light is actually a little bit warm as well, which is why we've got this tinted orange light now. Okay. And you can also tint the texture. So if you want to change the color of this, you could go in and manipulate this to be a different color. And this is just overlaying a color on top of your light. Just keep it like something like that for now. And I think because of the new texture that we put in, this light does not need to be so small. It's actually providing a bit of crispness in the shadows without us having to do anything. So let's just bring the exposure down. It's not so intense. just an example of what you can do with these textures. And there's a bunch of different types of these. Let me just show you one place where I found them before. So this is a great other place to get free HDRIs for one. There's a bunch in here. And then if you scroll down to the bottom here, they have this Lightsmith collection, which gives you a bunch of different HDR image files that let you customize your area lights. So even things like a television light. So if you wanted that nice blue glow of a television screen at night, you could get something like that, or a ring light that you see in a lot of videos now, or some of these other soft boxes that can really help you emulate a studio environment. This is where I got the one that I'm using now, this Umbrella A. Okay. So let's just add these other lights in. And then we'll just tweak this a little bit. Okay, so this is our basic lighting setup, and we'll tweak this again as we get on into the texturing section. Nothing's ever really finished when it comes to this stuff. I'm only explaining it in stages like this. Confusing to have all of this stuff thrown at you at once. But I'm always tweaking these things as I move along in the process. As I'm adding textures, certain things will need lighting adjusted. So just keep that in mind. We're never really finished here. We just stop working on something. So let's just delete this. We don't need this lighting setup anymore. We're just going to stick with this one for now. And then one more thing before we move on to the final lighting element is the camera. So last time we just talked about the basic focus distance. So that was just helping us get a nice bokeh. So remember, if we increase this radius here, it's going to increase the what is called the circle of confusion radius. And that's just the area around our focus point that is being blurred out. So you can see a very, very small focus area now. So we can pull this down. And then down here, what I didn't explain was the image and bokeh image. To affect how this looks, the bokeh, which is the blurred out part of our image here. So if I just use bokeh image and go down to normalization mode, go to white color sum, and then there's another image texture here that we would need to add. So click on the three dots over here, and then let's navigate to our bokeh images. And we have a few images here that I've made for the course. And these are things that you can do in Cinema 4D or in a program like Photoshop, where I've just created these simple shapes, one that has a bit of noise and one that has these three layers added together. So let's just show you the RGB. So if I just bring this in, it's going to totally change the look of our bokeh. It's actually going to give it this color, this chromatic color effect. And this is something that can be found in a lot of different cameras as well. So this is another way to add a lot of realism to something that is supposed to appear photographic, is using these different bokehs. And just playing around with the power and the aspect ratio, you'll be able to get some really interesting looks to the bokeh. And then using things like the pentagon shape will change it in different ways. It's not going to appear super clear on this, but it will actually change the individual bokeh pieces to be this pentagonal shape. So just ways to create different variations. And this is just simulating the aperture of your camera and the shape that it has. Down here with the shutter blades, similar thing. So let's just go back to this RGB. I use this a lot. And we'll just tweak our radius. So you can see from where we started, we've got a much more realistic scene coming together. Just by doing a few simple tricks, adding a couple free assets or things that you can make on your own. And that really, really boosts up the realism of your basic Redshift lighting setup. Okay. All right, so last thing, I promise it's the last thing for this section. Let's go over to the objects up here, and we're going to grab a Redshift environment. And this is totally an unnecessary thing for a lot of purposes, and can actually drag down your render time a ton. So use it with caution, I would say. But this is a way to add a bit of atmosphere to your images. And depending on what you're working on, this can be totally integral to the look. So what this is going to do is help us get a bit of a fog or volume scattering here. So let's just tweak these parameters here. I find this works well for something subtle. And let's just remove all of our lights except for this area light here. Got a good example. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the volume tab, and then we've got this contribution scale. So that is controlling how much of this environment fog is going to be affected by our light. So right now there's none. So if we just bring this up, it's going to start introducing a atmosphere, a fog, almost if there is dust particles in the path of this light. So it's going to fog out and blur out our light like that. So this can be a great way to add another layer of realism to your scenes by just adding a bit of atmosphere. Nothing's ever going to be super clean and super pure, so just adding a bit of this can make your scenes feel a lot more tangible. Gives you some more depth. And like I said, for certain scenes like a fog moonlit night or something like that, or just a really dusty old abandoned house, there's always a lot of debris floating around in the air, dust particles that pick up the light in an interesting way. Another place where it's also apparent is if I use a sunlight object. Let me just grab that again. Just for a quick example. So we've got this really sharp light, and if I just go into the sun, down here to the volume contribution, you can start to see how much this fogs up our scene, like that. It's more of a hazy day. Yep. Something like that. So it's just another tool that you can use to create a bunch of different looks. Okay, so let's go back to our basic lighting setup here. More of our indoor studio setup. And maybe this is too much. We can always pull it down later. We find that we don't need this much fog. And then in the Redshift environment, the scattering here, which is controlling how dense that fog is. So the area lights controls how much each light has, and this main scattering controls how dense the fog is. So if you pull it up like this, it's pretty thick. You can create a smoky room or something like that. Okay. Let's just bring this down again. Don't need anything near that high. And then maybe we want to bring up the intensity of our dome light again. And here we could also adjust some of the colors if we want to on our material. And that was just up here. Maybe I wanted a little bit more desaturated. And maybe a bit more contrast between the two colors. Okay, and we'll get into that material stuff a little bit more in the next lesson. Oh, we've lost our dome light. There it is. Okay, not sure how I deleted the dome light, but let's just do this again real quick. There we go. Okay, so now we've got our really basic indoor lighting studio set up, and I've shown you all the other tools that I typically use for building my scenes using the Redshift, and also where to find some other assets that you can use to kind of amplify the realism of your different lights in Redshift. Okay, well, thanks for listening. We're going to jump over into texturing now, so I'll see you there.